finished my mom's shawl. I kind of like it. I wove in the ends, but I haven't clipped the tails because I haven't blocked it yet. I kind of like it. It's very warm. I think it'll be cozy. I think when I get it all pinned out for blocking, I'll show you guys like more of what it looks like because you'll be able to see more of it. But you can see we've got all kinds of different textures and things going on with it, but you've seen some of that already. Happy winter solstice, everyone. It is December 21st. I thought that I would do the Q&A today because I just don't have tons of content to share with you guys over the last couple days. Nolly, shush please. This morning was very busy. I had a haircut and then I ran a bunch of errands and I didn't get home until almost 2. And so I've been working on my dad's hat since I got home, and I'm about to try to do some baking for a get-together this evening because I have a new friend who has invited me to come over to hang out with like a women's, I guess like kind of like a women's group. It's just a bunch of like women who found it hard to make friends in the city that they moved to. And so they're like, why don't we all just hang out? So they do that periodically, and tonight they're going to be hanging out, and we're going to be, I think, having soup, and yeah, I think that'll be good. So I'm going to try to get something baked. Honestly, don't know what I'm going to bake for that yet, but I should probably get on it. So yeah, so I'm gonna answer some questions before I do some baking. I didn't have tons of questions, but I did have some. So I'm gonna answer them the best I can. So I'm not gonna do them in order. I'm gonna kind of jump around a little bit, I think, just for variety. So the first question is, how did you and your husband meet? So my husband and I met through a mutual friend. My best friend at that time was dating one of his best friends. And my husband's name is Alex, for reference, if you don't know. So my best friend at that time she was going to a New Year's Eve party at my husband's house, like with his friends and stuff, and she was gonna be the only girl there. And she begged me to go with her because she was saying like they're just gonna be playing board games and possibly video games all night, and I'm gonna be bored out of my mind and I want another girl there. So I'd actually just had knee surgery like 3 days before, and I did not want to go because it was like 2 or 3 hours away from where we lived. So I ended up going with her because she convinced me. I wanted to help her out. So yeah, on crutches and like 3 days post-surgery and on a lot of medications, I just went to this stranger's house to spend the weekend. And we ended up kind of hitting it off. He was very nice. He was the nicest person I'd ever met. He took care of me the whole time I was there. He would help me up and down the stairs. I slept in his sister's room. He helped me up and down the stairs. He would bring me food constantly. I remember at one point I asked for just like a cup so that I'd have something for brushing my teeth. And he brought me like a cup with ice in it and then like 2 drinks just in case I wanted them. I was like, this guy is really nice. Wow, he's such a good host. And then like at the end of the weekend, as I was getting ready to go back home with my friend, he was like, Words with Friends was popular back then. And he was like, hey, do you play Words with Friends? And I was like, oh, no, not really. I don't really play any like phone games. And he was like, well, I just started playing with my friends and it's really kind of fun. Do you want to try a play? Can I add you on Words with Friends? And so I was like, sure. So he added me on the Words with Friends app game thing, and like we played a couple of rounds of that. Through that, he got my number, I think, because I think I can't remember how that worked, but I think he got my number so that he could add me as a friend on Words with Friends and whatever. Anyway, we were dating 3 weeks later. So yeah, we dated long distance for the first 2 years. 2 years that we were together. And that is how we met. Yeah. And I think I was still in undergrad at that time. So, and I was like 4 or 5 hours away from him. And so every 2 weeks, one of us would drive the 4 or 5 hours to visit the other. We just alternated weekends. So that's how Alex and I met. And we lived happily ever after. That was quite a while ago. That was about 10 years ago that we met. So that's exciting. Okay, so next question. How long did it take you to start spinning consistently? I still have a lot of thick and thin, but have only been spinning on a 1960s Ashford traditional since September. So I spin on my Kiwi 3, Ashford Kiwi 3. I got my spinning wheel for Christmas last year, and I started spinning in, I think, January, because I think it took me a minute to be able to get all of the stuff that I needed to assemble it, because the Kiwi needs to be assembled. It's part of what makes it more affordable. Or budget friendly, is that you have to do all of the assembling yourself. And I did do all of like the sealing and the finishing of the wood for mine, because that is recommended to protect the wood so that it ages nicely. Even though I like the look of the naked the naked wood, I did want to take care of my spinning wheel, so I did finish all the wood for it, and Alex helps me put it together, and I think I actually have a video of all of that on the channel. So I have been spinning since January this year. So how long did it take me to start being consistent? I think my first like very consistent yarns started probably in the spring or the summer. I can't remember how often I was spinning though, so it's kind of hard to tell as far as like number of hours or number of skeins that it took before I really started getting consistent. But I would probably say probably 6 or 7 skeins in, I was really getting pretty consistent with it. Probably. And I'm not really sure what made the difference. A great channel if you are wanting more resources for learning how to spin or learning how to spin consistently or just expanding your skills. The Jillian Eve Fiber Arts channel is awesome. Evie is an amazing teacher. She was actually, that was her career before she went into fiber arts full time, as she was a teacher. And so she knows how to teach, and she is very skilled, and she just has the most beautiful soul and heart, and she is just absolutely lovely to watch and learn from. So I would definitely recommend the Jillian Eve channel on YouTube for just expanding your skills. She has courses too, and and she also has a Patreon, so you can take workshops with her and all kinds of stuff. So I watch her channel a lot. I haven't done any of her workshops or anything, but I am actually considering her Patreon because her content really is very high quality. She's very knowledgeable and she's very passionate, and she puts a lot of love into what she does. So yeah, I would recommend that for anybody who wants to learn how to spin or wants to expand their skills, or who just loves to watch spinning content or historical fiber arts content, because she does a lot of like historical stuff on her channel too in regards to the fiber arts. Yeah, so Molly, shush please. Yeah, but for me, I think it was 6 or 7 skeins of yarn in. It was very thick and thin for the first skein was absolutely, it was a beginner skein, and it was very fun. And then the second skein, I was like, okay. Actually, I think my second or third skein was pretty consistent, but it was very thick consistent. It wasn't until I tried by my third or fourth skein, I was like, I kind of want to do like a worsted DK kind of weight, that I was really having to figure out the thick and thin thing. For me, find that it is a lot of like, it's based on feel. Like, I'm a very intuitive spinner. So, I just am kind of like feeling what's happening, like how the fibers are moving through my hands, and, depending on like the fibers, sometimes like I do have to like, police it a little bit more. Sometimes it wants to spin thinner than I want it to. So I have to try to make it a little like thicker. So yeah, so that's, I guess, where the thick and thin can kind of come in, is I'm trying to keep it at this and it wants to keep going thinner than I want it to. And then too, like I learned also that it's okay to just, when it gets really, really thin, like thread thin, and that's not what you want, it's okay to stop and break that portion. And I just use my fingertips to kind of fluff it back up again, and I rejoin so that it is a consistent thickness throughout. So if I ever do accidentally get like a really thin spot, I'll redo that spot sometimes. So yeah, I feel like that was a long answer to that question, but hopefully that helps. I know Jillian Eve definitely has at least one video on her channel about spinning consistently. Let's see. So another question. How did you become inspired to try your own pattern designs? I love seeing the sweaters you made, the shawls you make, and etc. And it's awesome that you just created your own items from what made sense to you. Oh, thank you. That makes me happy. So how did I become inspired to try my own pattern designs? I think it was just very, again, intuitive for me. I was knitting for about 10 years before I ever used a pattern, or YouTube or a book or like anything. Like, I just had yarn and needles, and that's it. I had no other information other than the yarn shop lady taught me how to knit and purl. That's it. I didn't have any other, like literally no other resources. So if I saw something and I wanted to try to make it, like I had to design it because I didn't really have any other option. I probably could have learned how to read patterns, but patterns were scary to me. It was much less scary to just try to make it up as I went. So that's, I think, how I got into it originally. That's all I did for the first 10 years was I just made up my own stuff. I had never used a pattern. More recently, I would say that my designs have gotten a little more sophisticated. Although I don't have any published designs or anything, I just make up stuff. Well, I'm kind of wanting to do that, actually. Hopefully in the new year, I'll have some designs. I have some things I'm working on, so I'll keep you updated on that. But my designs have gotten more sophisticated now, and I think some things that motivated me or inspired me around creating designs for myself that are more sophisticated, and then ones that I could write up and actually create a pattern for other people. Mina Phillip from the Knitting Expat spoke a bit about like how she started getting into designing, and it was also very kind of like, she had a very like organic process with it. Like her process though was that she would get a pattern and then she would modify it heavily. So she just kind of got into designing that way, versus I didn't have any patterns. I just had to make everything up, which ended up not being, I mean, I made some very rough and ready pieces, but they were functional and they did what I wanted to. Like I was doing intarsia 8 or 9 years ago. Before I didn't know what intarsia was. I'd never heard the word. I had never heard the word color work. I didn't know. I just knew I wanted more than one color here, and if I was going to get the yarn to stay in one spot in the place that I wanted it to make the design I wanted, I had to do these things with the little yarn strings. That's all I knew. I played around with it until the yarn did what I wanted it to. But hearing Mina talk about that kind of inspired me. I was like, oh, okay, well maybe I could actually do actual designs then. And then listening to other designers process it, like Helen Stewart. I love Helen Stewart's designs. What's his name? Stephen West. Listening to him talk about his design process. They recycle a lot of their ideas, which I thought, I love that, because I can sometimes feel pressure, like everything I do in life has to be like new and original, and no, like if I have a good idea, I can use it in more than one thing. And yeah, using patterns and learning how to read patterns and learning different techniques has definitely expanded my knitting vocabulary. So I can design more interesting things and make it a little more sophisticated and work better, and it can be a little bit better thought out because I actually have the tools and the vocabulary for it now, whereas before I didn't. So I think my next step to that will be getting a stitch dictionary. I think that'll help a lot, because yeah, sometimes I kind of have an idea of what I'm wanting to do in my mind, but again, I'm kind of making it up from scratch, versus the stitch probably already exists in a stitch dictionary. And that would probably make it easier. Yeah, so how did you become inspired to try your own pattern designs? Yeah, that's basically it. I'll have an idea and I'll just translate it into yarn. Like my niece wanted a flower shirt. That's what she said. She's 4. She's like, Auntie Claire, I want a flower shirt. And I said, okay, baby, I'll make you a flower shirt. And in my mind, I'm like, do I want to crochet this or do I want to knit it? And then I thought, I want to crochet it, because for me, color work is easier with crochet. And then I just immediately thought granny squares. I'll do granny squares with a flower motif. And so then I didn't want to reinvent the wheel, so I looked up YouTube tutorials for different granny squares with a flower in them, and I found one I liked, and then I picked the yarn and the crochet hook that I thought would be good for that yarn and the gauge I wanted, and then I created granny squares until I thought that I had about the size of pullover that I needed for a 4-year-old, or at least a 4-year-old that's the size of my niece. And then I figured out how I wanted to seam them so that they would create the neat seam I wanted and one that would lay flat. And then I created sleeves that I thought would be comfortable, and I don't know, it's just I had a general idea when I started, and then as I go, I sometimes call it doodling with yarn. I did the same thing with my mom's shawl that I just designed for her, which I am writing up as definitely as a recipe, maybe as a pattern, but it's probably just going to be written up as a recipe. Same kind of thing. I took just a very generic, standard kind of boomerang shawl style idea, where you just kind of start with just a very few stitches, and then you just increase and decrease on each side until it creates a triangular shawl. But then I added a lot of texture and lace panels and stuff. And it was just as the spirit moved me as I went. Like I just would knit for a little bit and garter, and I'd be like, yeah, this needs eyelets. And then I'd do eyelets, and then I'd knit for a little and garter, and then I'd be like, this needs a texture, and so then I'd do a texture. And then I was imagining what the whole shawl would look like when I was done, and how the color stripy portion versus like the more like tonal portion would look. And I knew I wanted lots of texture on the tonal side because that would create more visual interest. And I was like, I want lace, but I want like a punchy lace, because this is like a kind of woolen spun, hand spun, that's like a worsted or Aran weight yarn. And so this needs to be like a very like punchy kind of lace. If it's too delicate, it'll get lost in this specific type of yarn. So then I made a lace panel, and I actually couldn't find a pattern for the lace I wanted, so I took one that was close and then I adapted it. Yeah, anyway, and so it just kind of like went from there. And I had a general sort of idea of what I wanted, but then the specifics presented themselves as I played with the yarn. And then by the end of it, I was like, oh, look, a shawl. So that's kind of how that worked. Or something will inspire me, like the yarn itself will inspire me often. Like I have some yarn right now in my stash that's a sea glass colorway, and I know that I want something that feels very aquatic. I want it to be a shawl, and I want it to remind me of the ripple of waves or of water, or like maybe like a tide pool. Or so yeah, I feel like, again, that was a really long answer. How did I become inspired to try my own designs? I think that answered that question very thoroughly. Okay, let's see. Do you have any tips for spinning Surrey alpaca? I tried to think about this question for a bit, and honestly, I've never spun Surrey alpaca, so I don't have any tips for it. But again, Jillian Eve probably does have some tips on her channel, because she's spun like every fiber in existence. Plant, animal, synthetic. Like she talks about how she spun magazine pages, like paper from a magazine, like the page she spun it. It was for I think an art exhibit that she was part of. Anyway, she probably has some good tips for you for spinning Surrey alpaca. But I would imagine that it would be similar to spinning silk or mohair. It might be more similar to spinning mohair. I don't know what the staple length is like on Surrey, but I imagine it's shorter. Well, for Surrey, because they have long locks, I really don't know. I can't answer the question, and I am sorry about that. Spinning alpaca is a little bit of a trial, because it's very short staple length and the fibers are very slippery and silky. So I don't think you can do a long draw on Wakayan alpaca. If I said Surrey, I apologize. Wakayan, that's the fluffy guys. And then Surreys are the guys with the long, beautiful locks of silky fiber. Yeah, I'm sorry I can't answer that better, but maybe check Jillian Eve's channel. I'm not affiliated with Jillian Eve's channel. I just like her a lot. I don't know if anybody's affiliated with her channel, other than her beautiful self. So, okay, last question. When you first started, who was the person, designer, mentor, etc., that first inspired you to want to create your own textiles? I don't know. When I first started, I was like 7. I was like 7 years old when I first started to crochet. I think I started to knit in high school, maybe college. It's kind of hard to remember. It's been a long time now. And I really don't know what inspired me to start knitting. I think I just really loved yarn. I'm pretty sure that was it. Like, I think I would just go into Hobby Lobby with my mom and be like, oh my gosh, look at all this yarn. It's amazing. I love it, but I don't do any yarn craft, so I can't get it. So I think that I wanted to play with yarn and that's why I wanted to knit. And then I do remember we went to a yarn shop opened in our town when I was in high school or college, something like that. And my mom was like, hey, there's a yarn shop that just opened. Do you want to go and see? I think maybe because she knew that I had been kind of interested in learning how to knit. Maybe. Oh yeah, that was it. I was interested in learning how to knit, but she hadn't knit since, you know, in years, so she couldn't remember. So she was like, hey, yarn shop just opened up, so do you want to go check them out and we can see if they can teach you the basics. I think that is actually, yeah, I think that's how that started. So we went over to that small local yarn shop, and the owner there was so sweet, and she sat down with me at this table, and she taught me how to knit and how to purl, and then I never stopped. But that's all I knew, was I knew how to cast on, knit, purl. I think my mom kind of helped me figure out how to bind off, just because she was trying to remember, like, you know, back in the day, how did I do this? Yeah, and I don't think there was really a person that inspired me to start knitting. I think it was just I really wanted to play with yarn. So I did a lot of scarves, and I don't really think I ever wore those scarves particularly. It was much more, I think I've always been a process knitter, actually, like more of a process knitter, because for me it is all about getting to play with that beautiful yarn and watch the colors and feel the textures and watch the little loops, and then like see like what I did over the last several rows. And it takes me forever to finish anything because I'm constantly stopping and looking at it and just like being so happy with all the little stitches. So yeah, and I think that that's what that question, I'm sorry if that wasn't what you were asking, but I answered the designing part. So first inspired you to create your own textiles. So I think that that was what that question was like, you know, what inspired you, who inspired you to knit. As far as who inspired me to knit more educatedly, I guess, who got me out of my black hole of just playing with sticks and string by myself. Because seriously, for about 10 years, that's all it was. It was just me and my yarn and my needles, and that's it. I didn't know what a circular needle was, nothing. I would just go into Hobby Lobby whenever I'd run out of yarn and get one or two more balls and then make another scarf. Or whatever it was I was trying to make. You know, I would think, you know, oh, I want to make a hat, and I figured out increases and decreases on my own, and again, the color work thing. I would make fingerless mitts all the time because basically you could just make a rectangle and then seam it together and just leave a hole for the thumb. So yeah, I made all kinds of stuff I just figured it out. Kind of like when you hand a kid construction paper and scissors and just say, here, be free, little bird. That was me. Yeah, but as far as a person who inspired me to become more sophisticated and educated in my knitting and my art, that was definitely Mina Phillip from the Knitting Expat. I had a ball of Malabrigo Rios in the Hojas colorway that I had gotten from a local yarn shop while I was visiting my mom later in college, or maybe at that point I was in my master's, I can't remember, but at some point I was whatever, young adulthood. And it was the most beautiful yarn I'd ever seen in my life, and I thought it looked like stained glass. And I didn't use it for at least a year. It might have been 2 or 3 years. And I just held on to it because it was just too beautiful and I didn't know what to do with it. It's the most beautiful yarn I'd ever seen. And so finally, I was scrolling on Pinterest looking up yarn ideas because I was like, Pinterest is full of crafty stuff. I bet it's got stuff for knitting. And there were so many things for knitting on Pinterest, and my mind was like blown. And I saw a herringbone stitch, and I was like, oh my gosh, that would be perfect. That's just what I need, because I tried garter and I tried stockinette, and it wasn't doing what I wanted it to with the colors. I wanted it to look like stained glass, and the colors got too muddied with those stitches. And so I saw the herringbone stitch, and I was like, those long overlapping stitches are just what I need, I think, for those little color changes in the yarn. So I looked up a YouTube tutorial for herringbone stitch, and I created a cowl, and it was magic. And that was the first time I'd ever gotten on YouTube to watch something about knitting. That was the first time I'd ever learned to stitch from another person. And it changed everything. I can't remember what the tutorial was or what the channel was, but from there, I was like, oh my gosh, I never want to stop doing this. I did this beautiful stitch with this beautiful yarn, and what else could I make? I could learn things. And then I was less scared to learn new things with yarn. So I started looking up, I can't remember what key terms I used, but I looked up, I wanted to see like knitters in their natural habitats, and I came across Mina Phillips' channel, The Knitting Expat, and she has a bunch of vlogs. She does lots of vlogs, and she has over the years. And I was just fascinated by listening to this person talk about knitting in their day-to-day life and putting their child in knitted items. And then she was a designer too. And so then I started watching her podcast, and then I learned about her design process. And then I felt brave enough to maybe try a tutorial for a pattern. And so I looked at an easy lace cowl pattern on YouTube, because I'd never tried lace, and I was like, well, I want to try lace. So the first pattern I ever tried, as far as like full pattern, not just one stitch, was a lace cowl, and I fell in love with knitting lace, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can make a pattern. I'd still never read a pattern. That still took me a little bit. Yeah, so, and then a couple months after that, I watched Crazy Sock Ladies, Kay from the Crazy Sock Ladies channel. I watched her tutorial for knitting socks on DPNs, and I knit my first pair of socks, and yeah, that was all last year. So it's only been about a year or a year and a half that I have been knitting using patterns. Before that, everything I did was I just made up in my head. So yeah, Mina Phillip definitely inspired me to really try more stuff and to be brave with my knitting. And she says all of the time, everything's hard the first time you do it. But then it isn't hard anymore. And she often says, one stitch at a time. So that really, yeah, it just made me brave. I can do anything one stitch at a time or one row at a time. And even if it takes a while, the yarn is so beautiful. So I don't mind spending some extra time with it. Because for me, it's all about spending time with the yarn. It's just a bonus that I get a lovely thing I get to wear afterwards. And I still experience quite a bit of awe when I see a finished shawl. I was blocking my mom's shawl last night, and I just stood there staring at it for 5 minutes, and I was like, I've got to go to bed. I can't just stare at this thing. Yeah, but it's, yeah, I think it's amazing what we can create with our hands. So that was a long answer. These were very long answers to these questions, so maybe it's a good thing I didn't have more questions. I think I'll pause. I'll stop this part of the video because I need to get baking, and I don't want this Vlogmas episode to be super, super long. So thank you guys so much for asking questions. if you have any more questions for me, please feel free to let me know. I would be happy to answer them for you. I can try to have shorter answers if you would like. I don't mind giving long answers. Obviously, I can be very long-winded, but I can try to keep them shorter if that's helpful. Thank you guys so much, though, for asking those questions. That was really, really fun. And it's nice to know what you're interested in hearing about. So, alrighty. I made some progress, though, on this hat. So that's nice. You can see I'm not a quick knitter. That's 30 minutes of work, and I got like, I don't know, 3 or 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 rounds, 5 rounds. I guess it's not bad. It's 130 something stitches, and it's 1 by 1 rib. So, and it's on these 16-inch needles, which is not my favorite. So anyway, I find that it strains my hands a bit. So I can't do that for long periods of time, but it's okay. Alrighty guys, we'll switch to the next portion of the video, which will probably be very short and festive, and I will see you, I will see you guys later.